And I think we have to give much love and appreciation and thanks to Haile Karima for always making Sankofa a safe space in the community. And I doubt that he's here tonight, but we always have to give much love and thanks. I'm Wilmer Leon. I'm truly humbled and honored that Brother John Jeter asked me to facilitate this evening and introduce him in his book to you all. I'm a bigger fan than you want to admit. One quick note about myself, and I say this because I think it applies to John as well. I always try to tell you all the truth, and I try to be consistent. Not always right, but when I'm wrong, I'm consistently wrong. And over the years of my first having read John's work, listened to him, and then becoming friends with him, I have found those traits are similar. He focuses on telling the truth, and he is consistent in that effort. And those are some of the traits I think we share. Well, thank you very much. I wanted to, and I asked his permission if he would allow me to read just a couple of paragraphs from the prologue of his book.
Like I was going to say no, right?
You could have, and you are bigger than me. So I wanted to, this is from the prologue, and he writes, where do I want to start this? Okay, I'll just start from the beginning of the paragraph. That the live stream genocide of the Palestinian people would shock the conscience of a nation, even one as morally bankrupt as ours, is hardly surprising. What did shock me, however, were the images of a broad swath of Americans, whites and blacks, Latinos, Arabs, and Asians, Jews and Catholics, and Muslims and Buddhists, shedding their tribal identities and laying it all on the line to do battle with the aristocrats who are financing the occupation, slaughter, and siege of Palestine. If memory serves, the notion to write a book about America's class struggle occurred to me sometime in 2009, meaning it has consumed at least 15 years or more than a quarter century of my 59 years on this earth. And were I to reduce my prodigious research and volumes of reading to a single declaratory sentence, it would be this. When the 99% comes together to fight for one another rather than against each other, then the revolution is nigh. I cannot predict with any certainty the quality of that revolution or even its outcome. Only it is imminent, for the historical record clearly asserts that the nationwide uprisings on college campuses prophesy the resumption of hostilities between America's workers and their bosses. And this stuck out to me because this, first of all, talking about blacks, Latinos, and Arabs shedding their tribal identities. This issue about shedding tribal identities, to me, is very poignant, and it is also very astute, because what we find ourselves battling in many instances is the weaponization of identity politics. And so I thought that was incredibly poignant and incredibly insightful. Also, historically, we've been told that foreign policy doesn't really resonate during the American political season, that people don't vote foreign policy, that people tend to vote domestic policy. But if Kamala Harris loses on Tuesday, one of the elements will probably be Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, because Muslims and Arabs are mad as hell. And what might offset that, the only thing that I think that might offset that, is or are the Puerto Ricans who are more angry at Trump for what I call that genocidal race fest 2024 that he had in New York last Saturday on the 26th. But this, I believe, will demonstrate a real significant impact that domestic American foreign policy is having on the domestic agenda. And finally, where you talk about the revolution being imminent, and I think that is so true. And Gil Scott-Heron told us it's not what you see playing out in the street. That's not the revolution. That is a physical manifestation of the revolution, which is when you change your mind, when you change the way you look at things. That's the revolution. And then what you see in the street is a physical manifestation of that. And so, again, I found that very relevant. So with all of that having been said, let me introduce to you a man that is, he was a former correspondent for the Washington Post. His book, Class War in America, How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, Are you a worker or are you white? Which is why we're here. You can find him on Patreon as well as Black Republic Media. And you can find him right here. John G.
I thank you all for being here. I'm reminded, if there are any basketball fans out there, I'm reminded of an NBA player who was drafted at 19, Stephon Marbury. He was from Coney Island, very poor neighborhood in Coney Island. He was from a family of basketball players. All of the kids were kind of expected to save the family from poverty. Is it on?
No. Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Yeah.
Maybe change direction.
Talk to the top.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. So anyway, it reminds me of me being here today. Reminds me of a basketball player named Stephon Marbury, who was drafted at 19 from a very poor family in Coney Island. And I remember watching the draft back in the days when I used to watch things like that, the NBA draft. And he said he was crying, he was in tears, right? About to be a millionaire. I don't anticipate I'll be a millionaire, but he said to the crowd, he said to the interviewer, he said, it's been so long. It's just taken so long. And I'm just struck by the irony, because he was 19, right? Like, how long? I'm 59, right? This book has been in my head for 15 years, and it's just taken so long, right? But I'm so thrilled to finally be here. It feels like I've really accomplished something for the first time in my life. So I don't want to, Wilmer and I thought this might be better as a conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about the book, a little bit about my process, and then maybe just have a conversation, open it up. Wilmer and you guys, if you have any questions, I just think that might work better, right? So let me talk a little bit about the process, where this book comes from. Around the time Barack Obama was elected, actually right when he was elected, I was hired to work at a NGO, a nonprofit in New York City. And I was working, my bosses, the president of the organization and my immediate boss, the communications director, were both Black. And so I had very high hopes, right? I am, as the late, great Randall Robinson wrote, I am obsessively Black, right? Or I was at the time, certainly. And so I had great expectations of that moment, right? With the Black president. I didn't have great expectations of Barack Obama, but I had great expectations of the nation at that point in time. So I went to work for this nonprofit, and this is what I wrote about that. At roughly the same time, I met a young woman of Portuguese ancestry named Jennifer when I went to work in the Manhattan communications office of a liberal think tank, PolicyLink. I was excited to work for two African-American women, Angela Glover Blackwell, the organization's founder, and my boss, the communications director, Millie Hawk Daniel. None of my ideas ever seemed to find much reaction with Millie, or Angela, especially, who seemed to revel in her physical proximity to Obama at a White House summit for far more than she valued systemic change. When I proposed ghostwriting an opinion piece about a series of Bay Area police killings of African American men and pitching it to major newspapers, Angela dismissed it out of hand. When later I mentioned that African Americans did not share PolicyLink's enthusiasm for charter schools, Millie looked at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead. Far more disturbing, however, was Angela and Millie's mistreatment of the few African American staffers in the New York office, including Keith, who was my subordinate, and Tawana, the receptionist. If Millie's bullying of Keith and Tawana was a dark and violent force that left them demoralized, then Jen's solidarity with Keith and Tawana was a countervailing force of light. Once, when a white associate loudly berated Keith, Jen ran to his defense, interrupting the tirade by pretending to ask Keith for a file that she urgently needed. The entire office closed ranks around the immensely popular Tawana, but no one so much as Jen, who helped her brush up on her computer skills, adroitly diffused questions from Millie about the hours Tawana put in, and provided Tawana with any reconnaissance she gleaned from conversations with Millie or other staffers in the Oakland office who Tawana had little access to. Jen always went above and beyond her job description to help organize office birthday and holiday parties, was fiercely loyal to her ambitious African-American supervisor, told the New Yorican communications associate that she would handle her task while she took another sick day to recover from the flu. And although she was chronically overworked, was always the first to raise her hand when I needed some last-minute copy editing done. Once, Tawana admitted to me that she viewed Jen as a sister, even though she was closer in age and complexion to Millie and Angela. A few months into my time at PolicyLink, Jen pounced as I arrived for work one morning. "John, can I have just a second?" she said, closing my office door behind her. "Of course," I said, a little worried by her unusually sober mien. "I know that you are going to be in on Keith's performance review later on today with Millie," she said. "And I just want to make a case for giving him a good review. He works really hard, but it's a hard job because you do so many different things for so many people, that there's no one person who has a full view of everything you're doing. I know because I had the job before Keith, and I can tell you that Keith is really doing an excellent job," and I held my hand up to interrupt. "Jen, you have no worries," I said. I had already planned to give him an excellent review. Jen exhaled, visibly relieved. "That's great, John. I thought you would, but I was just worried that Millie might not have the whole picture." I tell you this story because it was a revelation for me, a revelation in that it was later in researching this book, of course, this whole issue of class before race became a real theme in the American media. But at this time, 2009, 2010, it was still very much black-white, right? And this was during the time of the subprime mortgage crisis, which targeted Blacks, African Americans. Barack Obama handled that in a way that asset bubbles had never been handled before, right? He did not typically, almost in every asset bubble that popped, around the world, right? You would shave off a portion of the homeowner's debt so they could stay in their home, so they could still have buying power. What Obama did was he actually threw money at the banks that swindle people, disproportionately Black, out of their homes, right? That is why we're in the situation that we're in today, right? With the economy, we have the consumers, most of us, except for Wilmer, have no buying power. And so that's why we're probably on the verge of a very deep recession and possibly, not to be an alarmist, not to be Chicken Little, but possibly the Greatest Depression, as many, some economists are predicting. And so that was sort of the first revelation, the first time the thought entered my mind that there's a book that needs to be written about class relations, right? It's true. I'm not a communist, right? I'm not now, nor have ever been a communist. But I will probably do until the real ones get here. That's true as well. And so this encounter with my white Portuguese colleague, coworker, led me down this path, which just opened so many more doors for me in understanding not just class relations in the United States, but also in the world to some extent. And more intimately, it opened a door that helped me understand my own life. And so what I mean by that, I'm not going to tell this story, I'm not going to read this story because it's probably a little bit too profane, but the encounter with Jen, right, this white Portuguese woman stepping up, right, and the two Black women are the enemies in this tale, right? It made me review everything that had happened before in my life. And the first thing I thought of, and I write about this in the book, was when I believe I was 11 years old, it would have been 1976. And me and my father is driving, my mother is in the passenger seat. I think I'm with my older brother who's sitting next to me in the back seat, and my little brother, who was a toddler at that time, was in my mother's lap. And we stopped, it might have been July 4th, I'm not sure, it's been so long ago, but we stopped at a gas station, and it seemed like it was a Saturday, and my father gave the gas station attendant, if you remember those days, he gave her a 20, but she gave him change for a 10. My father was wasn't as big as me, but he wasn't afraid of anything, right? He just was. And so he was belligerent. He wasn't violent, so he wasn't going to actually do anything, but he was belligerent with him, right? You know, and he said, I'm not going to repeat here, but she called the police. And my father stayed right there, and he waited for the police. And the police, listened to her story and listened to his. And of course, you believe the white woman cashier. My father, I'll never forget this. He slapped the change out of the police officer's hand, and the police officer was much bigger than him and armed, right? And he said, "Mother F your change, Peckerwood," right? But this is what I even in that moment, I knew he wasn't. My father was a auto worker, only had a high school education. He was a brilliant man, read everything. And even in that moment at 11, I knew that my father wasn't mad just because they were white, right? And after the exchange with Jen, I realized, because of consequent conversations with my father, who died in 2011, that what really angered my father was the class tensions inherent in that encounter with the cashier and the police officer. Both of them were white. Not because they were white, but because he considered them patsies for a ruling class, which was laughing all the way to the bank by pitting them against us, right? And so this was like the first, I think my first sort of, not conscious, because I didn't really dissect it till later, but my first encounter with the class struggle in America. And from there, I think it really just opened all these doors and these windows from which to see the world, right? That class and race, people talk now, especially since Barack Obama was president, they talk about the how misguided identity politics is, right? As Theodore Allen writes in his famous book, The Invention of the White Race, first Europeans arrived here in the United States in 1619, there were no white people. And there wouldn't be for another 70 years, right? The white identity, right, is the enemy, not white people, right? Or as and Dr. Leon will laugh at this probably because he knows that if Fred Hampton had never lived, I would be practically mute. But as the pastors used to say, we don't hate white people, we hate the oppressor, right? And so this really clicked and drove my research. The first revelation, the revelation that really kind of opened it to many more sort of revelations, was this. I read about Barack Obama, his last trip abroad as president. I think it was in December 2008. Trump had already been elected. And he goes to Greece and he gives this interview. And he talks about how Greece is the birthplace, the cradle of democracy. He talks about how the United States can learn so much from Greece, right? So I pick it up. What was left unsaid in Obama's august soliloquy is that while Greece is typically acknowledged by Western scholars as the cradle of democracy, the country could, in fact, learn a thing or two about government from its protege across the pond. As it turns out, the political and economic crisis that had by that time vexed Greece for nearly a decade following the 2008 global financial meltdown is virtually identical to the dilemma that confronted the state of Virginia some years earlier. With the state's coffers emptied by a deep recession and legally forbidden from printing dollars, just as the European Union prohibited its member states from reproducing euros, Virginians couldn't merely manufacture legal tender to repay the lenders who loaned the state cash to pay its bills. Tough choices had to be made. Virginia, like Greece, could pay its creditors or it could pay its citizenry, but it could not pay both. And just as in Greece, Virginia's politicians largely underestimated the electorate's wrath. And rather than renegotiating the interest rates and their loans, both Democrats and Republicans opted to make full payment to the wealthy who advanced the state money by buying its bonds, while taking a fillet knife to the budget, gutting it like a thrashing, gasping trout that washed ashore in a rainstorm. Lawmakers closed nearly 100 public schools in a single calendar year, shuttered hospitals, sacked civil servants, shaved wages and pensions, and scaled back mail delivery. What's more, Virginia legislators let them eat cake cuts to public spending, or what economists euphemistically call austerity, sapped consumers of what little buying power they had, worsening an already bad recession. Virginians revolted, forming a third political party similar to the coalition of Greek progressives known as Syriza, meaning from the roots or radically. After initially stumbling out the gate, Virginia's Mavericks regained their footing, outpolling incumbents on both sides of the aisle and seizing control of the state legislature, the congressional delegation, both U.S. Senate seats, city halls in Richmond, Danville, Petersburg, and the governor's mansion, all within a single election cycle. It was a bipartisan electoral bloodbath. At this juncture, though, the Old Dominions narrative begins to diverge sharply from Greece's. For while Syriza blinked and ultimately agreed to a repayment plan that actually deepened government cost cutting to satisfy the country's creditors. Virginia's Jacobins stormed the Bastille. Once ensconced in the state legislature, the upstart third party unilaterally reduced the interest rates paid on the state's outstanding bonds, infuriating Wall Street. The Populist Party was just getting started, however. With the cash saved from refinancing, lawmakers reopened shuttered schools and clinics and built scores of new ones in underserved areas, raised taxes on the rich, and slashed them for everyone else. Moreover, because Black voters accounted for a sizable chunk of the state's rank and file, or the party's rank and file, party leaders were responsive to their demands. Reforming a criminal justice system that African Americans complained was discriminatory, and doling out patronage jobs to their Black constituents like so much surplus cheese. 3 years into the political revolution, African Americans accounted for 54% of employees in the Secretary of State's office, 38% of the state's postal workers, 27% of employees in the Treasury Department, 28% of the state Parks Agency, and 11% of Virginia's pension board. And in stark contrast to the modern nationwide trend of closing public schools and replacing seasoned teachers of color with the careerist, inexperienced college grads from often hired by union-busting schemes like Teach for America, Virginia lawmakers quadrupled the number of Black teachers over a 5-year span, effectively hiring scores of African American teachers to replace white teachers fired for low test scores on certification exams. So many African Americans were employed in Virginia's public sector, in fact, that at the government's apogee, at the movement's apogee, the manager of the Danville tax assessor's office wrote to a friend, quote, "My office looks like Africa because there are so many Black people in it." The year was 1881. That really was the catalyst for the book, discovering this political party in Virginia, in the former capital of the Confederacy, that was the most potent, although short-lived, the most potent independent political party in American history, right? They actually produced seismic changes. They modernized the state of Virginia, but they weren't an outlier. Between roughly 1865, the end of the Civil War, and 1900, every state in the Confederacy, in the former Confederacy, had an interracial political party or a coalition that combined interracial voters that redistributed wealth from the top to the bottom, from the wealthy to the poor and the working class, or to the 1% to the 99%, right? And that is what sparked Jim Crow. That is what has sparked American history ever since. If you look, another revelation, and a big one actually, Jim Crow coincides, it actually really starts to gin up after the Haymarket riots, the Haymarket massacre in Chicago in 1886, which is the result of the Knights of Labor, white and Black workers, white and Black unions. They're segregated, but they work together. And they were really gaining ground. They were really starting to organize the railroads and the big industries of that day. So the Haymarket massacre was an attempt by the oligarchs to basically repel that revolution, that uprising by the workers. And it showed some success, and so they expanded it. And that became Jim Crow. Whether that was conscious or not, I don't know, but they saw that violence, right, and pitting white workers against black workers, it helped to diffuse the movement. And so Jim Crow really expanded after Haymarket, and it really sort of found its voice during the 1894 recession. It was a very deep recession, the deepest the country had ever had up until the Great Depression. And so what we see, for instance, is this sort of growing response to Jim Crow to interracial collaboration. And that it defines the Wilmington Massacre, where there was a interracial party, very much like the Readjusters in Virginia. There was an interracial coalition between the Populist Party, who were basically white farmers, agrarians, and black Republican voters. And they did very much like the Readjusters. They redistributed wealth from the very wealthy to the working class. And so this is the pattern that we saw, and it is basically the cycle that we're in, and we're still in it. It's a call and response between racial capitalism, right, which pits black and white workers against each other, and racial democracy, which is, to be honest, a tenuous collaboration, a tenuous alliance between black and white workers. But it works, right? We've never been able to address racism fully. But in those moments when black and white workers work together, right, when the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, allowed their unions to be integrated. They were created in 1935 to integrate the organized labor. When they did that, it sparked the modernization of the American economy that lasted more or less about 40 years until Ronald Reagan began to fragment a bit at the end of the 70s when we had the stagflation crisis. And by Ronald Reagan, and his raison d'etre was to split black and white workers, to split that New Deal coalition, because that was, to the ruling class, that was their kryptonite, right? That was that was their kryptonite. So they couldn't defeat it, they had to split it apart. So I say all that to say, because we're 2 days from an election. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you this. I can tell you what my research shows me and what I think this book will suggest. We'll see whether or not it's right or wrong in a few days. But this enduring battle between racial capitalism and racial democracy continues to this day. And in fact, if we could say that the period between roughly 1935 and 1975 was being won by the racial democracy, in which blacks and whites work together, more or less. We've never been a rainbow society of any type, but in those moments when blacks and whites work together, even in that tenuous coalition, we have made gains, and the workers have made gains. We have captured, in 1973, the workers' wages accounted for 52%, almost 52% of GDP, gross domestic product. Today, it's about 42%, right? So this battle between racial capitalism and racial democracy has very real, material consequences. That's the point I'm trying to make. And so now, clearly, right, we are in a period in which racial capitalism rules today. Are we seeing a shift? I think we probably are, right? How big a shift that will be, I can't say, but I do believe, if you read the book, hopefully when you read the book, you will see that what these young people on these college campuses are doing in protesting genocide in Gaza, what they're doing, two things. One is, particularly at the elite universities like Yale, Harvard, NYU, Princeton, as my ex-coworker David Montgomery attended, school I couldn't get into. What you see in their protesting the genocide in Gaza is that they are surrendering their white privilege to fight for people of color. That is what sparks change in America, right? And I would expect, although I can't predict, you never can predict, I would expect that in the next few months and years, we're going to see those anti-genocide protests on college campuses intersect with other working class movements. Climate control, we're already seeing is intersecting with the cop cities that are being constructed around the country, particularly in Atlanta. Climate control, cop cities, police brutality, affordable housing, and I think the mother lode, I think, probably of social democracy, which is a single-payer healthcare system. So whether or not we will win these things, I can't say, but I do believe we're going to see this renewal of racial democracy, or at least an attempt to renew racial democracy, because we've hit, as the Italian theorist Antonio Gramsci would say, we've hit rock bottom, right? We are at rock bottom. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better, but we're pretty much near the bottom. So this is the time, I think, where we'll see people reorganize. But let me end with this, if I can. Ronald Reagan really is the one who is singularly responsible for splitting up that New Deal coalition. But there was a moment in 1992, the Democrats were trying to figure out how to get back in office. They had been out of office for 12 years. And they were trying to figure out how do we get back in office? How do we regain the White House? They had two models that they could have copied, right? There was Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalitions, 84, 88, where he clearly, it was a racial democratic model. The Rainbow Coalition was an attempt to recruit Black and white working class people into this big tent Democratic Party, right? And the few of you who are old enough remember that Jesse Jackson did very well. There was a template there, which, if you think about it in retrospect, could have rejuvenated the Democratic Party, right? They would have been a very different Democratic Party, but it could have rejuvenated the Democratic Party. Even today, even in 2020, when we had record high voter turnout, nearly 100 million eligible voters did not vote. So we see now that had really a lot of potential. But Bill Clinton and Al Gore, they did not choose Jesse Jackson's model for rejuvenation for the Democratic Party. They chose Ronald Reagan's model. In other words, they chose, right, to compete for white racist votes. Then we called them Reagan Democrats. There is a county in Michigan right outside Detroit, Macomb County, which was the home of Reagan Democrats. And Bill Clinton's pollster, Stanley Greenberg, wrote volumes about that county. And he found that with that county, mostly white blue-collar workers, why they voted for Reagan was because they thought they equated almost in a binary way. Black was bad, white was good. It was sort of a reflexive, almost a default position, right? Bill Clinton decided to follow that model, to compete for those voters. How do you do that? Well, you do it by, beating up on Sister Soldier, right? You do it by announcing, while he's on the campaign trail, announcing that you're going to go home as governor of Arkansas to oversee the execution of a mentally retarded Black man, right? Who didn't even realize he was going to the chair. You do it by having a press conference on the campaign trail announcing a rehabilitation program to deal with recidivism in Georgia, Stone Mountain, Georgia, which of course has a very special place. It was the birth of the second birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan, and being surrounded by Black men in orange jumpsuits, right? And then you do it once you get into office. You do it by the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill. People think that the crime bill was that the racial disparities were unintentional. They were not. They were the point. They wanted to show those Macomb County Democrats, see, we can be just as hard on Black people as the Republicans. That was the intent. Everything that Bill Clinton did was intended to show that the Democrats won't be, in the words of George Wallace, out inwarded, right? And so this is what I will end with. That is still the template for the Democratic Party. There's always been, of course, the template for the Republican Party, at least for the last century. And that is why Kamala Harris won't promise anything for Black people, right? In fact, she goes out of her way to say, I'm not gonna do anything for you, right? I'm gonna do something for everybody, and you get in when you fit in, right? It's why when the state of Missouri, think about this, in the state of Missouri in September, they executed a Black man, Marcellus Williams, who clearly was not guilty of the crime that he was accused of. He clearly did not do it, right? Why did Kamala Harris, it was a state trial, so she couldn't have stopped it, but she could have used her pulpit as a candidate for the White House, as the vice president, to say, well, we have some concerns about that. Why don't you at least have a second trial? Why don't you at least retry the case? Why didn't she say that? Right? Instead, she's campaigning with Liz Cheney, right? How many people in this crowd are going to go vote for Kamala Harris because Liz Cheney supports her, right? You see what I'm saying? And so this is why I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I am. If I had money, I would bet the farm that she's going to lose. And the reason I think that is because this electoral strategy, right, of punishing your base, I think it's run its course, right? I think what you're going to see, I don't think you're going to see Donald Trump get 25% of the Black male vote or anything close to that. I think he might get 12%. I think at the extreme, 15% of Black men, and I don't think he'll get that much. And some of that, a lot of that, would be Black men sending a message to the Democratic Party, right? So my final point is this: I think we're at a point where the Democratic Party is going to have to understand they can continue to appeal to racists, or they can win campaigns, but they cannot do both, right? I think we're at that point finally, thank God. What happens next? I don't know. It's going to be up to us, right? It's going to be up to us to organize, to pressure, to push. Do we go to the Green Party? Do we reinvent the Democratic Party? Do Blacks especially, do we have our own party which works in concert with the Green Party, or a reinvented Democratic Party? I don't know, but I think all these questions are going to be on the table in the next few months and years, and particularly because I'm not going to vote for Kamala Harris. I wouldn't tell anybody else who to vote for. I'm not going to vote for a genocider ever. But I do think that I would not gaslight anyone who said Trump is a madman, right? The choice between a madman and a genocider, that's what racial capitalism has brought us, right? And so I do think that even Americans who are, let's face it, we are the most propagandized people on earth. But I do think that we're at rock bottom, particularly when we see the next recession, which I think is going to be very soon, certainly within the next 6 months. I think we finally understood we can't keep doing this, repeating this insane cycle, right? Voting for people who do nothing for us, and in fact, are who mean us harm, right? To show white racists, right? Which is not all white people by any stretch of the imagination, as I just talked about with this woman Jen, who I work with in New York. But it is it's insanity to continue to vote for a party that means you harm. So this is how I will end, because I think it's so appropriate, and I think Dr. Leon will appreciate it. What happened in that period between 1935 and roughly 1975, when Blacks and whites had a tenuous coalition, still racism, wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we were working together enough where we could move forward, right? And whites ultimately, generally speaking, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, many of them went back to being white. They retreated into this white identity. It's not white people, it's a white identity, right? Many of them retreated, they betrayed us, they turned on us, right? Still, I think what's going to happen is an opportunity to regroup, to reorganize, right? Because American society right now is organized around Black suffering, right? I mean Black in the way that Malcolm X meant Black, anyone who's not white, right? It's organized around Black suffering, right? Is there a chance that if we regroup, we reorganize, and we move forward, that there's going to be a possibility that whites will once again turn us, it's a very good chance. We would be foolish, black workers, not to realize that, right? And so I think the goal should be, right, very much as Fred Hampton said, right? The goal should be, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I don't want to refer to anybody as yellow, but the goal, I think, in the final analysis should be black power for black people, white power for white people, brown power for brown people, X power for anybody we left out, right? We all need to control the resources in our communities. Of course, there's a superstructure, right? Murder is murder and theft is theft. But I think in our communities, I think we almost capitalize on the segregation, right? Southeast DC has control over the resources in the community. I live in Northeast DC, and I am hard pressed to find any business that's owned by black people. I'm hard pressed to find any two really great fish restaurants, and I don't think black people don't own either one of them, right? We don't own any. This is Chocolate City, right? And we don't own any more. This is a statistic fact. We don't own any more today in 2024 than we own in January 1st, 1863, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That's just a fact. What that means is that we don't have any buying power. We don't have any control over our own resources. We exist at the pleasure of other people. So I think finally the goal should be power over our own communities, ownership of our own communities. And I'm going to leave it there and see if you have any questions.
Outstanding, John G. Outstanding. I know you all have questions. So before we get to that, let me earn my pay and make a couple observations and ask one question, then we'll come to y'all. Your last point about Black people in DC, that made me think about Sam Yett's book, The Choice, where he talks about we have become obsolete people. He writes, all the dishes have been washed, all the water has been drawn, all the wood has been chopped, and all the shoes have been shined. And so now the question becomes for us, what is to become of us? Because in the minds of white people, we have become obsolete. In fact, there's also another book, I think it's called What to Do with the Negro. And it was by Frederick Wilhelm. I have to look that one up. But that book was published in the early 70s, where The Choice, I think, came out in the late 70s, early 80s. I think some of what Mr. Yett wrote about came from, I think it was Frederick Wilhelm or Wilhelm was the author
I thought Yett came out in the 70s because he was punished by the Nixon administration.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me look that up. Anyway, white identity versus white people. And I think that's a very important distinction to make, because you're getting into not phenotype, you're getting into psychology. When you start talking about white identity versus white people, you're moving beyond the phenotype of skin color and getting into the mindset, the consciousness of white supremacy, which we as people of color not only are subjected to and victimized by, but we can internalize that. I'm sorry? I thought I heard somebody say. We can internalize and wind up victimizing ourselves. You talked about Reverend Jackson did very well in his 84 and 88 campaigns. And I would say that one of the things that gets overlooked with that is no Jesse Jackson in 88, no Barack Obama. Because one of the things that Reverend Jackson very skillfully negotiated, and thank you, the late great political scientist, Dr. Ron Walters, was proportional distribution of delegates. Before the Jackson 88 campaign, it was a winner-take-all system. And as the Democratic elite were pressuring Reverend Jackson to get out of the campaign, the thing that he negotiated going forward was proportional distribution of delegates. And it's that proportional distribution of delegates that wound up bringing us Barack Obama. And so I don't think Reverend Jackson gets enough credit for having negotiated that incredibly astute change in the party dynamic. And again, we got to give credit for that to Dr. Ron Walters. Oh, and you mentioned Greenberg and the work that he did in Detroit with the Reagan Republicans, and that just made me think about Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas?
Right.
Which, if you all haven't read What's the Matter with Kansas, phenomenal insight that Thomas Frank wrote.
But I think, and that's important too, Thomas Frank's book, which is very good,
Mm-hmm.
has a class analysis, but no racial analysis.
Correct.
And that, I think, is partly what inspired this book, is that combined, you have to understand, you can't parse one from the other. You have to have both to understand what's happening here today.
And that takes me to my question.
Okay. Yeah, I'll use that through.
Hey, man, and I'm about to dunk that rascal. Class war in America, how the elites divide the nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? What are the salient differences between your analysis, and this is my only question when it comes to y'all. What are the salient differences between your analysis about class and Thomas Sowell's analysis as an economist about class?
Oh boy, it's almost written in a different language. Where do I start?
Is that a valid question?
It's a very valid question. It's
Say
definitely-
brilliant if you want to.
Yeah, I would say marginally. Soul really informs this debate that we're having now. I had an interview yesterday and we talked about this, where you have, and I'm not trying to beat up on white liberals really, but I'm just saying that there is an idea, a feeling. I think Thomas Sowell's scholarship, for lack of a better word, informs this debate, this idea that identity politics is the problem, right? That Blacks, we have not assimilated into the culture, and somehow it is our ideas and this focus on our identity, our social identity, that is the biggest problem, right? One person I quote throughout the book is George Jackson, Soul Dad brother. Many of you have probably read his books, but he says, he writes, and I quote him, the biggest barrier to a united left in the United States is white racism, right? And I think that is definitely true. Thomas Sowell tries to make it almost a tit for tat thing, right? That, the whites, they were in a superior position, but the blacks are in a position, they do the exact same thing. And that's clearly, if you read the literature, if you understand, that's why Paul Robeson would always say, the only thing I want to be is more African, right? Because if you understand African, and most of our, not now, clearly, but most of our civil rights icons are the radical Black power movement, Stokely Carmichael, and as later Kwame Ture, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, they had almost a fetish for Africa, right? Like they had a deep appreciation for Africa. They devoured everything about it. That's not purely cultural. That's not purely, like the Irish trying to find out where they come from, right? It is political, right? Because we have, there are a few things that define an African mindset. And I'm not saying that the same is not true for a European mindset, but it's not true for a white mindset, right? And the things that I think define an African political mindset, we're sensitive to suffering, right? We just are. And we know this almost, it's a default position. It's not a trope. It is the truth. We are, I had an editor recently who told me that the relationship between Blacks and Palestinians is kind of overdone. There's a book called Blacks in Palestine, I can't remember the subtitle, in which the author, who I interviewed, talks about how there was a big rift in the civil rights community. This is before Dr. King died. SNCC really wanted to gravitate towards supporting the Palestinians And Dr. King, who was supported by, the Jewish community and whites, they were a little hesitant, right? And they, SNCC wanted to write, it was just an endorsement, basically, a paper or just something where they declared their support for the Palestinian cause. And Reverend James Bevel, right, who was a great man, right? I don't think, Bernadine Dorn told me once that he was one of the greatest men she'd ever met. He was opposing SNCC. And one of the SNCC members pulled a gun on him, right? Because this issue was that important to us, right? And so I say that to say that there's an African political identity that we have to take note of as we move forward, right? And that's not to say that it excludes Europeans, right? Because I think the Irish have a very similar idea. If you look now at the European community in terms of the people, not the politicians, the people, you see an outpouring of support for the Palestinians. So that identity is very much like the African identity, but that is part of our identity. The other part is we fight our oppressor historically, so one of us is dead. That's why the slaves, what's his name? The social scientist, Adolph Reed, who's always talking about, black people should, be like white people. He talks about how, it's ridiculous to think that the slaves ended slavery. They did. I mean, they did. They went out. They forced Abraham Lincoln, because if he didn't, they were going to end slavery by themselves. They had so many strikes where they just said, I'm not doing that. They sabotaged crops. They said, if I can't go see my, daughter on the other plantation, I ain't working, right? And that changed everything, right? It was us fighting our oppressor. You just got to kill me, right? And that says so much. People now talk about, well, we got to pick the genocider or the madman. No, we don't. We can fight for what we really need, what we really want. We can fight for our demand. So, I'm just a long-winded answer. I'm sorry, but this where I think Thomas Sowell gets it wrong is that he thinks of it as almost this. I would just say it. Almost a binary political landscape, black versus white, and it's not that at all. It is quick story, relatively. Organized labor in the United States between 1860, roughly, up until about 1935. Was segregated. The unions were segregated, and that was very deliberate. The Knights of Labor were segregated, but they worked together at least, and that really produced some very real dividends, materially speaking. Pay was raising, and workers were organizing. They were really moving on the industrialists. They broke up the Knights of Labor, and from roughly 1886, and I should say this too. This is almost funny, but they broke up the Knights of Labor through violence, right? Attacks on blacks, but also on whites. Like if you were a white worker and you were organizing with blacks, they would kill you, right? And so whites, most of the whites left, right? But 10 years later, after 1886, by 1897, there was almost no one in the Knights of Labor, but all of them were black, right? So we wanted the smoke, right? But the unions, the labor unions, which are one of the institutions that have failed us most, the media is the other, the academy I would add too, very much. But labor unions, which really failed us until 1935, really 1934, when there was a dock worker strike in San Francisco, there was an Australian dock worker named Harry Bridges who had a strike. The dock workers had a strike, and usually what happened was, it happened in a strike a few years before. Usually what happened was when the white union went on strike, the ship owners would just hire the blacks. When the blacks went on strike, they would just hire the whites. The blacks would hire a little bit less money, but they would just hire the other one, right? It was like easy. It was easy pickings, right? Harry Bridges, they had a strike. It was a white dock worker. Harry Bridges was from Australia, although I understand they have their problems with race as well. But he was also a wobbly and probably a communist, right? And he basically took over the union. He went to every church in the Bay, every black church in the Bay Area. He told them from the pulpit, I know we've given you a raw deal in the past, but if you abide by this strike, if you respect the strike, don't cross the picket line, I promise you when this strike is over, every one of you, right, will be, every one of you who's a dock worker, you will be in our union and you will have every right that I have, right? And the blacks had no reason to believe it, but they did. And they respected that picket line. It was a general strike. And Harry Bridges, that was the template for organizing the wealthiest middle class in the history of the world here in the United States. That was the template, right? Whites and blacks working together. Harry Bridges, before he died, even said that he hoped that the union only came down to two people. Somehow it only came down to two people. He hoped it to be one white guy and one black guy. He was pretty committed. The union had some problems, but still, that was the template, right? And so, and the reason that's so important is not just because, of course, if you have the workers working against each other, you can't pit them against one another, right? But also because we infuse the union with our African political values. What do I mean by that? One of the things that the dock workers in San Francisco struck for in 1934 was this thing called, what did they call it? Basically, when you went to work on the dock, you would go every day, and the pit boss basically picked you. And sometimes that was right for corruption because some of the dock workers would hire, would pay kickback some of their money to the pit boss, right? But obviously that's rife, that the potential for discrimination is rife, right? Because the pit boss was going to be white, and he was going to pick the blacks to work. He's going to pick the whites. So when they finally organized the docks, and it was black and white union, they got a hiring hall where basically you went and you were hired, but the union basically would hire you. They would pick who was going to work, and they would pick based on seniority and based on. But this was what the black workers added. The person who had not worked the longest got preference. The person who had been thrown out of work, the person who he hadn't worked for a week or 2 weeks, he moved to the front of the line. That was black people, right? Working with white people, because Harry Bridges had the good sense to say, yeah, that seems like a good idea. So this is the difference, I think. This sort of, it is complicated, right? And it's not. It is, we are many and they are few. But if you split the many, they got much better odds. And so I think that's, I don't know if that answers the question, but
It does.
it was my best attempt.
Well, and you succeeded. You succeeded in spades. Two things. One, remember this. When a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee pulls a gun on you, you have crossed a red line. And to your point about the relationship between the African American community and the Palestinians, about 3 years ago, there was a missile strike on a apartment complex in Gaza, and it decimated this apartment complex. And NBC went into Gaza after the strike, and they were doing interviews. And one of the people that I think it was about 3 years ago, maybe two. One of the people that they interviewed was Yahya Sinwar.
Mm.
He was sitting in this decimated apartment. It looked like it had just been struck by a missile. But off in the corner, as he's sitting on, one of the interesting things about him is, some of the most famous pictures of him, he's always sitting on a couch. That brother can find a couch anywhere. So he's sitting on his couch amidst all of this rubble. But off in the corner was a picture of George Floyd. And a lot of people, that didn't register with a lot of folks. But I remember very clearly watching this interview and just staring at the television, saying, this brother got a picture of George Floyd in his crib, all the way in Palestine.
And he talked about it.
Oh, I mean, all the way in Gaza. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the relationship between our community and Palestinians. Too many of us don't understand the strength they've drawn from our struggle. And unfortunately, too many of us don't understand the relevance between the two. With that being said, raise your hand and we'll turn it over to y'all. Raise two hands. Don't raise a hand, just stand up and scream. Yes, in the back.
Thank you for being here, John. This might be a difficult question to ask you.
Oh, those are the best.
I'm an educating organizer in DC, and I will admit my heart has been broken since 2020 in terms of George Floyd, and I believed, maybe naively, that things will be different. And the moment that I came in, everyone kind of tested their hands because people were protesting through the summer and all that, and went home. Where I was kind of like, the fight isn't over yet, guys. And
Just beginning.
over the last 4 years, we're seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of these organizers, many of whom I work with, Palestine situation aside, but what it's been showing me over the past 4 years is that many of these organizers are willing to throw anyone who is not of privilege under the bus for their own comfort. And I kind of see that in terms of this election. While people they might sympathize with Palestinians, they might sympathize with people of color in this country in terms of our needs and our struggle, they will also say in the same breath, but I have to worry about abortion. I ain't worried about this and this and this over your needs. And as an organizer, the reality is at this point, I'm kind of like, I don't want to necessarily do it, but I feel like I have to gatekeep in who I have within my circle to organize with, because if they're willing to possibly throw me under the bus for their own security and comfort, then I'd rather not be with them. So you mentioned, having to organize around something radical moving forward. And I definitely agree with you. My question is how? With the binary think of we have two parties, Green Party's not an option, ranked states voting ain't a thing, so we don't have a choice right now but to suck it up and vote for an evil person and hope they don't get bad, So how can we organize within that kind of think generally in the country? But then also for me personally, and for anyone who's like me, who does organize, but kind of sees the economy of people who are kind of more radical in their approach and others who are kind of, I'll say, more liberal. What would you say to people like me who have to kind of fight against that every single day?
I would say first, don't despair, right? And I say that, I should almost say like Dr. Hill myself, right? Because some days are just, it's tough. I mean, we're going down a very bad road, a very rocky road. So it is, it's no easy feat maintaining your hope. But as James Baldwin said, as long as you have breath in your body, we have to hope. And I do think, right, these things tend to turn. It's like the old line from, was it the Hemingway novel, where someone asks the protagonist, how did you go broke? And he says, gradually and then suddenly. That's what's happening, right? Like there's going to be a moment, I think, when we realize, everybody realizes, even people who voted for Trump, oh man, we are really in a hole. And that's when change starts to happen. So I can't tell you specifically what we need to do, but I can tell you, I think there are a lot of ideas that we need to toss around, both workers and workers of color, right? I do think there's I'll just give you one idea, just one idea. I really think that I'm actually pitching a book that I hope you're writing, the book next year. But I really think that there's something in reparations for Black Americans that can actually help save the country, right? So that's just one idea, right, that we can organize around. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the problem, as I described in the book, is that we don't make anything of value. And so this country makes its money through gambling, through speculation. We pay almost as much as we pay in the military, we pay in servicing the debt, right? The debt is, that's why they cut the budgets in all these cities, and we borrow money from these millionaires and billionaires, and then we pay them this. That's how they make their money, right? They don't make cars anymore. They make it through speculation, through loans, right? What if, one idea, right? Just I'm not a strategist, but what if, just think about this. What if Black people talked about reparations, the Black community, right? That's the thing. What if we talked about reparations not as a check written on the Treasury, which taxpayers of all classes have to pay? White poor people who are struggling too, right? The whites are struggling too. That's the whole point of racial capitalism. They're just not struggling as much as we are. But what if we thought of reparations not as a check? What if we thought about it as a fund that was financed by a Robin Hood tax, 1% a year, a tax on all Wall Street transactions that would affect 99% of it would affect the wealthy, the super wealthy, right? That would the last figure I saw would be 750 billion with a B a year, right? What if we tax them? Wall Street transactions, they put that money into a new Freedmen's Bank. And that bank was a nonprofit bank in the Black community in Southeast DC and Southside Chicago, the Bronx, Queens, right? And that bank was community owned, and that bank funded. We talk about the supply chain that's broken, baby formula, and all this stuff. What if we just started making stuff, right? What if we finance student loans, but not at what are they now? 9-10%? What we said we'll finance it at 3%, 4%, right? So what I'm saying is that there are ideas that we can discuss that can help break the cycle for us, and not just break it temporarily, but can actually have us, Black people, and actually we could be the spark for the entire workforce to own a greater stake in this community. The question really, and I don't even think I write this in the book, but the question really is, why do workers do 100% of the work for 42% of the pay? Right? Like you can't. There's only one answer to that, right? There's only one answer to that. So I think that by attacking that question, right, by strategy, I think there's something to be said about, Gary in 1971 and that idea of a Black political party, not working on its own, but what if? I mean, look, this is the truth of the matter, right? Kamala's going to win or lose based on Black turnout. Whites typically, right? The white community is typically divided in a presidential election, almost 50-50. I think this year is something like there's like a 3%, 4% difference between Kamala and Donald Trump. 6% on that. So our turnout is usually the tiebreaker, right? It might be different this year just because of Michigan and Wisconsin and the uncommitted vote. They might actually sort of they might determine some of those votes because those elections because they're going to be so close. But what if we thought about a Black political party that said, these are our demands, right? And I read about this in the book, the Readjusted Party in Virginia. They did this. The Readjusted Party said, well, we're going to cut the bonds, but the Blacks were like, well, we want to end the whipping post, which punished Blacks. They said, we want to end that, and several other things. And the whites said, well, whatever, right? And they went about their business. And the next election, the next year, the Blacks didn't vote for them, right? And so they went back to the Blacks and said, oh, you were serious, huh? And they were like, yeah, we were serious. And they got everything they wanted, right? And so I just think that, the thing I would suggest is not to despair. And I think we just, I'm reminded when I worked in South Africa, there was a story that they told us at Robben Island where all the Black political presidents were during, including Nelson Mandela during apartheid. And they told the story about how the guards banned only reading material that they approved of. No, there's another story actually. A story about how they wouldn't allow some of them to talk, right? They wouldn't allow this president to talk to this president, right? Like Mandela couldn't talk to Sisulu for a time, right? and they would communicate, and I'm not exactly sure how they did it. They said they would communicate, they would put messages in tennis balls, because they had a tennis court, they could play tennis, and there'd be a message in the tennis ball, and they would just like bat the tennis ball, and then, at some point they would pocket the tennis ball and see the message in it, right? I just think we have to outwit them, basically, right? These people are not terribly smart. They're using the same playbook that they used in 1894, right? And so I think that at some point, we just have to our greatest resource is our creativity, our imagination, our radical imagination. And I'm not exactly sure what form that will take, but I do think it's possible, particularly when we hit rock bottom, which I think is very close, right? I mean, we got $35 trillion in debt. More than $1 trillion every year is going just to service the debt payment. That's not sustainable. So I do think there's reason to hope.
Hi. I want to comment on a few of your things. First, I voted about 3 weeks ago. I live in DC. Harris is going to take DC 90%. That's what's usually the case in DC. I first voted. I was able to vote in '76. I voted for Carter, and I haven't voted for a Democrat since then for president. I always vote independent or green. Because I don't vote for people who aren't working in my interest on a matter of principle. I think Harris is going to win by a large margin. It has nothing to do with Black people. It has to do with the people who are 19 and 2020, who are 16 and 17, who are going to be the first-time voters, who are going to vote overwhelmingly against Trump. And more women. People talk about the Black men. It says, no, what Obama should have been castigating was all those white women who voted for Trump. Because they can decide in the election, because as a single demographic, white women are the largest single demographic in the country. So we get caught up in this BS too, because the polls are wrong, because the polls have to say it's close, because they need to have the money being paid to do more polls. And so the news media wants to have advertising to the last minute, so they say it's close. It's not going to be close. All you got to do is look at the historical factor of Trump. Trump lost by 7 million votes in 2020. So are you saying he's going to get, there's going to be a smaller margin when Biden was running against him in 2020 than and Harris in 2024? I don't think so. So people, you have to do your own analysis. But the main thing I want to say is this. Under conditions of war, you have 3 decisions to make. You can flee, you can fight, or you can surrender. Okay? And if Black people claim that they're under conditions of war, then those are your only choices. Most Black people in the United States and around the world have decided to surrender. You go to your job, you pay your money, you pay your taxes, you get pissed off, you kill yourself, you take drugs, but you basically do what the system tells you to do. So if Black people really want to be free, which is not the case, what we would say is, there's an old problem: when your enemies fight, let them kill each other. So what we should be saying is, look, this ain't our fight, Kemosabe, like, in the Tonto, in the long range. What do you mean we, white man? It's like, this ain't our fight. I'm a Black person. I'm a Black person in America. I'm not American Black. So from my perspective, this country needed to collapse as a political entity long time ago. Okay? When these white people start to fight about who's going to be the big dictator now in the country, let them fight, all right? Let all these liberal white people who thought that it was a democracy, let them fight the fight and say, okay, all right, we can't depend on Black people and we can't depend on Native Americans, because Black people have been here from slavery, Jim Crow, everything. We're going to be here no matter what. The question is, who's going to be in power? If we wanted to be in power, let the white people kill each other, let the white people destroy the country, let the white people say that there's no more, there's never been a democracy. How can you have a democracy in slavery? How can you have a democracy and half the population, women, couldn't vote? When they passed the 19th Amendment, that had nothing to do with Black women. That was white women given the right to vote. Black women still couldn't vote, right? They passed the 15th Amendment, which explicitly said Black men had the right to vote, and now we still have to pass all these laws to say you can vote. What's the point of the Constitution? So until Black people say, okay, we're not going to have cognitive dissonance. We're not going to act stupid. We're not going to wait for white people to save us because they can't save themselves. So what you do is say, okay, let the white people weaken themselves, let them destroy their own economy, let them destroy any resemblance of law and rule of order, and plan to say, okay, when they become weak, and we just pull back and say, okay, you can destroy it, and we're going to decide what we create from the ashes that you created. Okay, because Israel is showing you exactly what white people do when they feel threatened. They try to wipe out whoever they think is oppressing them. They wiped out the Native Americans. They tried to wipe us out, but they needed us too much. What we haven't decided to do is, under conditions of war, flee, fight, or surrender. If you fight to destroy your enemy. You don't fight to tie your enemy. And that's why the United States is still pissed off at Cuba, because when Fidel Castro, with his black army, took over Cuba, they made the prescient decision that African countries didn't make. They kicked all the capitalist white people off the island and said, get the hell off here. This is our island, and we will run it. The United States is still pissed off at them 60 years later. They trade with Vietnam, they trade with China, they trade with everybody else, but they won't trade with Cuba, because Cuba made the prescient decision that says, in order to be free, you can't leave these white oppressors anywhere on your land, because they will always come and try to rule over you and pit each other against each other, and we haven't made that decision. And under the times that we have made the decision, when blacks were allowed into the Union Army, they were the best killers of white people that have ever been created. And they did a damn good job, because the white Union soldiers weren't willing to kill their brothers and cousins as much as black people were. Black people said, we don't have no problem killing your kinfolk.
I would only say, I think you kind of answered your own question, though. If you look at what's happening in Israel, a white settler republic, we see. Get her. What we see, though, is like you just said, they kill us, right? We're in the crossfire. What happened with George Floyd? Did you see the look on his face? Like the backlash at first is going to be this fascist, racist backlash against us. White supremacy is a religion to them, right? And I write about this in the book. This idea of black suffering is what this country is organized around. So, you're saying we just sit out. We can't sit out. They gutted for us. They just like Nelson Mandela said, right?
I didn't say sit it out. I said let them kill each other.
They're going to kill us.
No. We
They're already
got enough guns. We don't have to.
No, we don't.
Okay,
No.
but if you let them kill you, they're going to kill me.
All right.
Okay.
Good luck with that. But we need to organize, right? And we need to take cues from our neighbor. Look at what's happening, and look at many people probably want to get the news from the mainstream media here, but look at what's happening in Venezuela. Look at the Bolivarian Revolution. Venezuela is a country that is just like the United States, 12%, 13% black, just like we are here in the United States. Look at that Bolivarian Revolution and what they've done, and that is a black revolution. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, right? And that revolution has endured even after the death of Hugo Chavez, and Maduro, the president now, is not the man that Hugo Chavez was, but he created something that's enduring. So I think we need to understand what our neighbors do. Look at what's happening in Mexico. We don't get this news here, but they have a party called Morena, which means brown in Spanish, right? Which is talking about the Mexican Virgin Mary, right? And they have modernized that country. They have lifted income for tens of millions of Mexicans in just 6 years' time, right? So what I'm saying is that there are models for us to replicate. Yes, this is a racist country, but can we bite off some of this country so that when the backlash comes the next time around, we own something, right? We control something. And just let me end with this. If we just let them kill each other, what are they going to do? What are they going to do to our kids? What are they doing to the schools, right? What are your kids learning in school? Our kids are one of the primary victims of a white supremacist society. Look at what's happening in Florida. It's happening all over the country. The whole school reform movement, led by Obama, right? The whole school reform movement is to prevent the rise of black radicals, much like when they killed Fred Hampton, right? So I just think I agree with your description of what we're up against. What I disagree with is your conclusion about how we fight.
And as you talk about Venezuela, it's also important to realize that those Venezuelans aren't wedded to Maduro. they're wedded to the revolution.
Revolution, that's right.
And they see Nicolas Maduro, their politics is not a politics of personality, unlike our politics.
Right.
They're wedded to the revolution. And to your point, the government has armed a particular segment of the Venezuelan community. One of the reasons why the United States won't go in and invade Venezuela is because they know that they got a whole bunch of armed Venezuelans beyond the military that will pick up arms and defend Chavista. They will defend the revolution. In fact, the United States tried to send, they call it, was called the Bay of Piglets. They tried to send in a mercenary group. They tried to send in a mercenary group, and a group of armed Venezuelan fishermen caught those mercenaries and handled them with dispatch, we will say.
And if I can just piggyback on that very quickly, there was a coup in Venezuela against Hugo Chavez. The military was organized by the elites. They kidnapped Hugo Chavez, took him to some building, Miraflores, I think anyway, they took him to some building and they told the media, because the media was actually behind it. The media told the people that he had fled with millions of their money, of their dollars, and he was on Cuba kicking on the beach with Fidel Castro drinking Mai Tais, right? And the people, mostly on these sort of citizen, I guess their social media at the time, citizen radios, ham radios, whatever, they were on these radios saying, no, he's not. No, I don't believe that. He's not. I know where he is. And they are mostly with pots and pans, and it was mostly black women. And there's a video, I can't remember the name of it, there's a documentary about this, where they marched to where they believe he's being held. And they got pots and pans, and the military's got guns. And they said, you're going to give him back. And that's exactly what they did, right? There were more things that happened, but I just say that to say that it's not hopeless. It's not. If you look at what they've done, it's not hopeless. And once again, and I write this in the book, Black people are not the problem. We are the solution. And I don't say that with any kind of enmity for white people, right? I say it with the enmity for white supremacy, but we are the solution, not just for ourselves, but for this country. And I believe that. I really do.
The revolution will not be televised, documented.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Hopefully this isn't a trick question. It's kind of based on a self-owned by AOC trying to stump for Harris, and I think kind of making the opposite point, saying that we should not be asking, who do we like better, but under which circumstances would you like to organize? What's the best organizing environment after the election? Do you want to,
That's what AOC is asking?
that was she was trying to say, like, to get people to vote for Kamala. As I say, would you rather organize under
Who gives us the better space?
Space to organize, like right, and then that's what I would have said last election, and if Biden was still running, and I'm not suddenly saying like, oh no, she's great, for organizing, she's going to create a great organizing environment, but I'm another one of these people who's really felt lost since 2020 because things were so clear. Yeah. And in 2020 election, I'm like, yes, I would like more of this organizing environment because you're asking me to organize against Trump or like the architect of this system that we're fighting against. The architect of what killed George Floyd,
You think that's Trump?
I think back then I thought Trump, provided the better organizing environment. Was a better united. But right now, I'm sorry for a second, I guess myself because I think that we're being presented with a question of organizing not against Trump, but against the Heritage Foundation versus on the so-called left or the Democrats who get a lot of mileage out of just dismissing us out of hand as Russian assets. Oh, you poor things, you've been indoctrinated. I don't see I don't know how to answer that question anymore. Like, what is the better environment? I'm a DC resident, so it's all kind of moot. I'm on down ballot, vote for Nifty. So
See,
I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are, and I think that's what we need to be thinking about is, you know, we aren't in the driver's seat here, but I'm just like, where do we go now? Because it's Heritage Foundation versus I don't know what has happened. They seem to just be able to dismiss us out of hand. I don't know where to get leverage in.
I would answer that this way, and I don't know, right? So your guess is as good as mine. But I think if we elect Kamala Harris, it's going to signal to the Democrats that this electoral strategy that they've had of not meeting any of the demands, any of the demands of their most loyal voters, they're going to think that's okay. They're going to double down on this genocide, right?
It's going to say, what is each side going to be able to achieve? Like, I think that Trump is better equipped to do what, the worst of what he wants to do now.
Well,
But your point stands.
Yeah, I would argue this though. I think I think they're both equally evil.
There you go.
And I would say to quote the late great Glenn Ford, the lesser of two evils is still evil. But I would even say that and I understand what you're saying, that Trump. It seems like he might be more willing to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Well,
right?
he has people walking behind
Right,
him. He
right.
has his Goebbels, his Himmler. He has all of that behind
Yeah, he
him.
does.
now.
But I would say, remember and maybe you don't, I don't know, but maybe the Occupy movement. And do you remember how this was under Obama? And do you remember and I was in New York City at the time, and there were all these complaints. I mean, all of these police in different cities, but in particularly in New York, a liberal city, they were acting and moving in the same way, which is to say, they were molesting women, right? And it was very clear this was their policy, right? They were literally arresting women protesters and molesting them as a signal, don't come back out here, this is what you're gonna get. That was under Obama. I'm not at all sure that Kamala Harris won't move the same way. She won't talk it the way that Trump talks it. But I'm not at all convinced that Kamala Harris, particularly since if we return her to power, she's gonna think that's a mandate. So I just think under Trump, and this is just my opinion, I don't know. But I just think that under Trump, people are gonna be more motivated, animated, to move, to organize, to mobilize. And that's our only hope, right? As Frederick Douglass said, if we are to be saved, it will be by the crew, not the captain. And I just think that's the truest thing that's ever been said.
I just think the other side, right, that I said Trump supporters were a little more complacent. They were a little more. They weren't as activated. I don't.
But
that's
think
my
part of it is, I think you have to separate Trump supporters from Trump.
Yeah, I mean that's why I kind of see my
But
fight at.
Because
with.
when you
My
look
fight is with the Trump supporters. That's who I'm going to be fighting in
Yeah,
the streets.
I think that's true.
So I'm
Literally.
so it's really like a strategic pressure to me. Like honestly, it is moot Kamala or Trump in many ways.
Yes.
So,
I see that.
but I'm like, what is going to affect the foot soldiers that we will be opposing?
See, I think even that though, again, it's just my guess. If Kamala wins, I think those people on January 6th are going to look like, oh man. I just think either way, I think we're in for the worst hard time, and we need to understand. What did Fannie Lou Hamer say? Whatever we get, we're going to have to fight for it. I just think that's the reality. I just think we might be more motivated to fight with Trump in office, but maybe we'll have to fight more. Trump. I don't know.
And also, it's important to realize that no matter who wins, the question was, what do you organize around?
Right.
Your interests haven't changed.
Right.
It's just the person at the top of the ticket or the person at the Resolute desk has changed, but we have to get out of the binary thinking of somehow Kamala Harris as a Democrat is going to be better for our plight than Donald Trump as a Republican.
Yes.
And I wrote a piece a while ago called The Dangers of Binary Thinking for the African American community. And so anyway.
Good evening. Hi, John.
All right, step back to that.
Sure.
If she heckles me, Wilmer, throw her out.
No, I'll probably throw you out.
Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so I have two comments and a question. And so the first comment actually is to this brother back here. One of the, everything you said really resonates, but one of the things that I would offer is that it assumes that Black folks in general believe that we are at war. And I actually don't think that the majority of us believe that we are at war.
Correct.
So that's a large part of the problem.
Yeah.
But I don't even think they believe in it. It's surrender. I mean, I think you're right, but I think the question is, or the idea that if you're at war, that you have to know that you're at war. You have to believe that you're at war, and I don't think we even understand that. And so my second comment is, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but John is going to be hosting a new show this coming Thursday on WPFW called Short Money. Every Thursdays at 2 p.m. And so I think the nation's capital and just people nationwide are really going to be in for a treat with that show. It's okay. So my question is.
Pay her, Wilmer.
Don't throw her out. Don't throw her out. I was getting ready to throw her out.
And so my question is really simple. What are we supposed to do with the Black elites?
I don't think I can say without. That's very interesting though. I mean, we need to deal with them. We need to address them. We really do. I mean, part of my book, I read a lot about that, one chapter in particular, but this system of racial capitalism, of white supremacy, has survived as long as it has because the ruling elites peel off layers of the working class. I read about in 1894, there was a dock workers strike in New Orleans, and the segregated unions, but they struck together, and the ship owners told the German and Irish and Italian dock workers who were recent immigrants, they told them, hey, we'll give you what you want, but if we ain't giving those N-words, nothing. And these German and Irish and Italian dock workers had not learned to think of themselves as white. And so they said, man, I don't know what you're talking about, right? We're going to get our money. And they got their money, right? And so, but ultimately, 20 years later, after 20 years of Jim Crow, they started singing a different tune. The same with the Jewish community, right? Not all Jews, right? But after the Holocaust, maybe this is understandable. After the Holocaust, remember, Hitler attacked the Jews because they were communists and non-white. Remember that, right? And so they were the biggest allies of African Americans, certainly here in the United States, even in apartheid South Africa. Because the Jewish ethos of healing the world is very similar to African Americans and a lot of other people of the global South. And so when they put Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, but particularly Ethel, when they put them to death, it was to send a message to the Jews: you can continue to mess with those Black people if you want, and this is what you got coming. And most of them ignored that, right? But at that moment, there was a guy who was born put in a political sense, Milton Friedman, right? Whose ideas of neoconservatism, he came out with the idea of vouchers, right? Right when Brown was Board of Education passed to give white parents an option to get their kids away from Black kids. And so what I mean by that is that they just peel off one layer after another to be white, right? Or to be honorary whites at least, And the last, of course, are Black people themselves, right? And this was clearly the movement that began in the late 60s. Fred Hampton's death, people don't tell you, Fred Hampton's death changed everything. Everything changed because they realized, we got a problem, right? And so there really was a movement born after Fred Hampton was killed that said, we have to peel off a layer. And this is almost, you can almost, if you read some of the news stories around that time, you can almost see them thinking, like you can see it in their brains coming out their head and them thinking, how do we pit Blacks against the other? And it's been slow, but they've had a lot of success, particularly after, and Denise, you will appreciate this, particularly after, so it was two Chicago people, after Fred Hampton's death, and then again after Harold Washington's death. They have really made an effort to make to create this Vichy class of black elites, and they've been very successful, and we will have to deal with it. I don't know if we, as Malcolm X said, why doesn't China have any Uncle Toms because they killed them all? I'm not sure that's the solution, although I'm not necessarily ruling it out. But I will say this: I think one way or another we need to address that, right? Samora Machel, the great liberation hero of Mozambique, he actually had all of basically the Uncle Toms and collaborators with the Portuguese during their liberation fight. After the war was ended, he actually had them come testify. And if they testified and said, yeah, I did this and I did that and I did this, and he would come out and he would say, he would basically clown them, but they would let them go. I don't know, maybe that's something we should do as well, think about as well. But we do need to address these Uncle Toms because they are a barrier to our emancipation.
So, John, since you think that Trump might win the election,
Probably, I think, yeah.
Thinking about geopolitical events that are happening, Ukraine, the EU having financial difficulties in terms of coming up with a budget, the Middle East, and the financing of the military industrial complex from Asia to the Middle East, with the resistance that's taken place from Iran to the Houthis to Hezbollah. Is this economy under any of whoever the winning parties are going to be able to sustain the economy here?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's in a shambles, and it's not just that it's in a shambles, but since we were already becoming increasingly isolated, but since October 7th of 2023, we've become even more isolated. So the rise of the BRICS, the de-dollarization of the global economy, just the political manifestations of what's happened, the deepening isolation. We don't make anything of value, right? At a certain point, the people's debts eclipse their ability to pay. So this economy is not sustainable. We're paying out more than $1 trillion every year. I believe that's almost 20% of the federal budget. That's going just to service the debt. That's not sustainable. So I can't predict how big it will be. It could be the biggest. It could be, as Fred Sanford used to say, Elizabeth, I'm coming home. It could be like that, right? But something is coming, right? This is the material world and how it acts. So no, like I said, there's a very real bottom that we're probably likely to hit within the next year, certainly both politically and economically. And that's just, we have to deal with that. We just have to do that. We've never seen in the history of the world, we've never seen the greatest industrial power in the history of the world go from that to post-industrial. We've never seen that. So how we dig out of that, I don't know. But we're going to have to address that, right?
And in that, it's also, I think, important to realize that just about all of the issues that you just mentioned are self-inflicted. The United States started the conflict in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin didn't wake up on the 21st of February and say, you know what I'm gonna do today? No. He was responding to decades of pressure from the United States and from NATO. And it was only after he realized, when he met with Joe Biden in Geneva and told Biden, I'm giving you in writing my security concerns, and I expect a response from you in writing about what you're going to do to alleviate these concerns. When Joe Biden ignored that at the behest of Secretary of State Tony Blinken, that's when Putin said, y'all leave me no choice. When you, to your point, the deindustrialization of America was a conscious decision.
Yes.
In search of cheap labor.
And to punish the radical Black Power movement, which had its base not in the prisons and the street gangs, which the Black Panthers organized, although that was very good, but it was to punish the Black radical power movement that had as its base the unions and the factories. Yes.
The deindustrialization of the United States, looking for cheap labor in China, was a profit issue. It was a conscious decision. And now the United States wants to cry foul because the Chinese have figured out a way to outdo the United States. Part of the move on Haiti right now, part of it is in search of the next cheap labor class in anticipation of losing access to the cheap Chinese labor. These are conscious decisions that are being made. The empire is dying. It is very obvious that some will say it's dead and it just hasn't exhaled its last breath yet. Put it any way you want to. But with BRICS, with de-dollarization, with these sanctioned countries figuring out, you know what? We don't need the dollar. We have our own currencies.
That's right.
We can trade with each other we don't need the SWIFT system. We'll create our own system. And with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, real quick, and then I'll come to your question. About 2 weeks ago, there was a story, I think it's Burkina Faso, has just entered into an arrangement with Russia to start launching satellites from Burkina Faso.
Right.
Now, that's not just a matter of, well, we're going to bring some satellites and we're going to like fireworks. No, there's a whole infrastructure that has to be created in Burkina Faso in order for this type of technology to be utilized and implemented in Burkina Faso. Just after they've thrown the French out, within months, they're talking about, oh, we're going to start launching satellites around here. And you mentioned London in the budget. One of the big problems London's having with the budget is energy costs. Why are Europeans now so concerned about energy costs? Because the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was their access to cheap Russian natural gas. And why did the United States do it? Because Ted Cruz convinced Joe Biden that we can make money selling liquefied LNG from Texas into Europe, and also the deindustrialization of Germany, because Germany's industries run off of natural gas and cheap oil.
And they're the largest in Europe.
And they were also the distribution hub for LNG and oil throughout Europe. So now you have, it was a conscious decision made by the Biden administration, but those that really control the Biden administration, to deindustrialize Germany. And now you see the
chickens coming home to roost.
Well, the chickens are coming home to roost, but it's happening in Germany. It's happened before that. It happened in Greece.
Yep.
It happened in Italy. Neoliberalism. The neoliberal policies now are being implemented because the elite are saying, "Oh, we got to cut all these social programs. Your retirement age has to raise, and your health care is going to change, and that month off in August that everybody has been used to for the last. Oh no, we can't do that anymore." Conscious decisions. That's what. These things don't just happen in a vacuum, and it's conscious
So
decision.
let me just piggyback on that 1 second. I think it's important to your question about the static nature of racism, which is true, right, here in the United States. But the situation is very fluid, and we should take note of the empire dying. It's still dangerous, right? When my African friends call it the last kicks of a dying mule, but it's clearly losing influence. They started a war in Ukraine so that they could put nuclear weapons closer to Russia and contain them so that they could recolonize much of Europe. And Biden bragged that the ruble will become rubble. The ruble is stronger than ever, right? They look at what they tried to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela a few months ago. Couldn't do it. AMLO, the president of Mexico, until he left just a month ago, I think, was openly railing against the United States, right, and United States interference in what they're doing in Gaza, and they can't do anything about it. Think about that, right? And so what you see is that the United States, the empire, is losing influence. And I do believe that there's a very real possibility that what happened to the Soviet Union in 91, right? Yeah. When the Berlin Wall fell, I believe the same thing. You're seeing that the client states are rebelling, right? They are no longer comfortable being within that world. And the last thing I'll say, like I said, I'm not a Marxist, but I'm pretty close. But the idea of primitive accumulation, which is what colonialism was, right? You just go in there and you just take it, right? You can stand in the way if you want, but you're gonna catch a bullet, right? That's what they're trying to do now, right? We see that with Ukraine. We see that where they have no other resource but primitive accumulation, which is why both Trump and Kamala Harris are dangerous, because they might try that with China, right? And I don't want to fight 1.4 billion people. I don't want to do it.
Neither did Richard Pryor.
Right. I don't want my son. I don't want anybody's son. So that's the danger. That's where we are. But the fluid situation, as dangerous as it is also an opportunity for us to capitalize, for lack of a better word, on this declining influence of the United States. They just don't have the power to control the world the way they used to, nor the technology.
Yeah, I came late, so I want to apologize about maybe my question is already dealt with. But I was very much interested from the day I saw the title of your book. I'm very much interested not in the reaction to a system, reaction to imperialism, reaction to colonialism. Our people have given enough capital of reaction that I know, from Africa to here, or if we take world global revolution, from the Bolshevik to the French Revolution, we've seen this, we have information capital. But what I'm interested in is how to construct in the new woman planet a class conscious society. I think, some of the discussion that I don't swallow very well is the fact that our language is that of the vampire. Imperialism is vampire language, white supremacy is, the very language, the very culture is very violent. For me to think that Africans will bring a better society, or third world people, by demonizing, humiliating, shaming anybody is a futile proposition for me. So I'm interested to see, if you thought about it, a class awareness or class consciousness and the constant, progressive, protracted building of human beings that are aware of class, who are aware of class contradictions with human face. Human face. I'm not interested in, to me, Kamala, Obama, they're not my agenda. They're more dangerous to the system. They all came by turn to demonstrate that this society and this system cannot be even repaired by people who look like us. So they demonstrated more the opposite than what you guys were saying, as far as I'm concerned. For me, they're dangerous to the system. Kamala is dangerous to the system. Trump is dangerous to the system, because in America, we know now a stupid person who can barely construct a sentence is considered a rival. All this illusion is a danger to the system, not to me. I'm critically aware of a planet I live in. So I'm interested in you, given the class war book, the title of your book, how do you construct men, women, our own children? I have 6 kids. I don't want a world that kills thinking they will construct a better planet. I don't. I've seen it. I've seen the best Russian revolutionaries be eaten up by the vampire they created themselves. So for me, I'm interested in a better society with human face. I don't have to kill nobody to bring a better society, is my new consciousness after having gone through all that. So I would like you to just address that, brother.
First of all, I would say that everyone here is probably interested in the very same thing, right? I'm not trying to demonize anyone by my title. I'm trying to talk about exactly what you're saying. How do you create the new man, the new woman, as Frantz Fanon would say, right? Well, historically, what we know both here and elsewhere, in Venezuela, like we talked about, in Cuba, what we know is that when we start thinking about ourselves as a community, right? People's thinking starts to change. That's very clear. And there's a British historian, I think he was a diplomat and became a historian. He wrote a book, like a pamphlet about the 7 stages of every empire. And the last stage is the age of decadence. But one of the stages is the age of intelligence or something like that. But he talks about how when people's thinking starts to change, and we saw this in the United States, particularly in the late 30s and the 40s, where we saw this flowering of art. We saw jazz. We saw these artists, who were inspired by people like Diego Rivera, Jacob Lawrence. We saw this flowering of art. I write about this at length in the book. We think differently. We move differently. People think different. And obviously not everybody, right? But it's gradual. So people start thinking of themselves as part of the community. And people say that in the book directly, right? I think of myself different as a woman during the Flint strikes, or right after the Flint strikes in 1935, 36. She says, I'm not content just being a housewife anymore, right? I'm part of a community and they need me. And you see this consciousness grow in periods of racial democracy where people think of themselves as part of the community. How do I help my community? Frankly, honestly, in the Black community, you hear that now, not among the elites, but among working class young people. I hear that a lot. How can I serve my community? What can I do to contribute? They really do want this. And so I just think that if you think that I'm trying to demonize white people, I'm not. If you think I'm trying to demonize...
Demonizing white people was not even my issue. It's not. I didn't bring that up.
Oh, okay, well, I'm sorry, I misinterpreted what you said, but I'm saying that's not the...
I'm talking about demonizing opposition, political...
Well, no, we need a response to political class, though. I mean, that's just, we need a political class that responds to our demands and to our needs. That's just something we have to have, right?
Say it again?
We need a political class that responds to our demands and our needs. That is something we have to have. That's what they got in Venezuela and in Cuba. And
I'm sorry, well, let's leave the example because we all go to a quagmire. The example of Cuba, Venezuela, etc. Let's not go there now because there is deeper things. We've traveled, we've seen this. That what we at this point, I'm saying to you, without having even, for example, to construct history makers, does not need evil force as an opposition. It could be a departing point for different individuals, different circumstances. But for me, this whole cowboy idea, Western mindset that Black elites themselves in the left wing carry is that the black hat, good hat, cowboy idea ingrained into their system, into their blood. Once you grow into this white supremacist planet, you have to always have evil to construct a humanly society? No, I don't need evil to build a society. I desire it because it's fair to everybody. That's the kind of construction I'm talking about. You don't seem to get me, my brother.
I don't actually. The whole thing is class struggle, right? It's like Fred Hampton said, it's class struggle. God damn it. I don't.
Building something for the sake of building something.
I don't know. I've never heard of that happening anywhere in history. It's the class struggle.
I'll make it, my brother. Nobody tells me to make history. Nobody tells me what to do, how to write a book, what to write a book. Once you get the consciousness, you don't need that catalyst.
And what I'm saying is that the consciousness is a result of class struggle.
No, it's not.
Well, I have 445 pages that says differently.
It's not necessarily so.
Well, tell me, what are you talking about? What country has done what you're saying without class struggle?
The problem is the vision I'm thinking about. We don't have modality. The hell with it. We don't need it.
You've got the tail wagging the dog. That consciousness is a result of class struggle.
I think the Black elite in America, for example, or in Africa, in Brazil, our problem is this very issue of always rallying in opposition to the devil. to the black hats, to the Indians, whatever the white Americans have put in our heads. I'm saying, to me, desiring a better society with human face is a different debate. It doesn't operate, it doesn't even bring Kamala Harris nor Obama.
With all due respect, I think that's magical thinking. With all due respect, I think that's magical thinking. To think that we're just going to sort of wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm a better person, a better world." It's a result. It's a result of a community working together, right?
That's not what I'm saying either.
We're trying to break out of the cycle. We're talking about all of these successful things that could be a amazing model for what we're doing going forward. But ultimately, you're talking about movements that have failed or disenfranchised or still struggling or are outside of the mainstream. And I think, I don't want to mischaracterize the point, but it's like, how do we take those lessons and cultivate something that is outside of
the lesson is there. We know it.
Where is the lesson? I don't know it. Where is the lesson?
Excuse me, my brother. We've studied everything that happened now. We've been invested in the black.
Well, name it, because I don't know what you're talking about.
What? The Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution.
Well, I talk about the Russian Revolution. I talk about the consciousness.
I'm saying to you, we know that part. I'm saying we know that part.
Yeah.
What I'm interested is, how do we construct? Okay. How do
You-
we construct it and build a population of class-aware people?
That's what the book is about. That's what the Russian Revolution inspired the New Deal here directly, built a different consciousness. That's not what I think is history, bro.
No, it's
That's
not
a
history.
fact.
It's your interpretation of that history.
No, it's not. It happened. You need to read the book.
Oh, brother.
But racial democracy is not. That's the whole point. The New Deal is. That's what the book is about. I don't know how anyone else would say it. That's what the book is about. That's what it is.
Because I'm not hearing you articulate something that is creative going forward. I feel like these are fundamental things that we need to understand. I think these are ideas that people have not been presented with before. I think there's a tragic lack of imagination.
Yes.
On both sides, and so I think these are seeds for the imagination that we need to create something that we don't have a name for, we don't have a concept for. So I understand what you mean when you say like magical thinking, and that it does not exist yet. But we are like, yes, okay, this empire is dying. What like
we're not gonna.
How can we shape whatever the hell comes next? And how can we start talking about, the Russian Empire versus the American Empire versus whoever has imperial aspirations? I'm not interested in passing the torch. How do we move to a post-imperial future? And I'm sure there are lessons to be learned in there, but also missteps that were made that we should not gloss over.
But what you're describing is actually the book. It is that process of reinvention, of learning from the past to reinvent yourself, right? There are missteps in there. We can learn from that. There are also successes. We can learn from that. Are you asking me what is the answer? I don't know. The people have to describe, have to tell me what that is.
I guess I'm asking for some acknowledgement that we need to come up with a new answer.
That's what I've been saying for the last 2 hours, right? Or am I missing something? That's what I'm saying. That's what I've been saying.
That's not exactly what's coming.
Okay.
He's provided historical background.
Yeah, I think the book might say it better than I did tonight. Then, yeah.
I mean, most folks don't know that story. Most folks don't know these stories.
Yeah, that's right. That's my point. Right. Yeah. And I can't sort of tell you the whole book in 2 hours, but I think if you read the book, I think your question will be answered. I think.
But personally speaking, I also think that when we're talking about using imagination and being creative, right? we don't create in isolation.
Right,
We
yes.
don't create in isolation. So even if John had an answer, and I'm putting that in quotes, I would be hard pressed to think of it as the answer.
Right,
Because
right.
all of this is so nuanced. What we need in, Southeast DC might be very different than what we need on the south side of Chicago. And what we need on the south side of Chicago might look very different than what we need on the west side of Chicago. And so all of that nuance needs to be considered. And so, thinking about this idea of innovation and creation, like we have to create. We have to be willing to innovate. And we never do that in isolation. That is fundamental to community. And as community members, you understand more than anybody what your needs are. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a thread that binds us on a very sort of larger level, for lack of a better word. But what it does say is that as a community in that sort of, smaller, constraint, we have to be the ones to think about what that looks like and be the ones to enforce that. So,
Yeah, the answers come from the people. It's got to come from the grassroots.
Excuse me, where are you, my sister?
I'm right here.
How are you?
How you doing tonight?
Okay, good. Thank you for coming to Suncoast. But let me say this. I'm saying, we come from the background. I come from the background personally.
Mm-hmm.
I come from you can go to the Fred Hampton he's talking about in Chicago, to the Black Panther Party, Bunchy Carter, all that. We lost a lot of people
Yes.
for the idea of revolution.
Yes.
And I'm now at an age
Yes.
where I'm saying, what is it for? All this death.
What is all this?
Excuse me.
Okay.
So the faculty of the imagination you're talking about, that I'm talking about, is really to trigger environments like this. In a bookstore like this, in this community, we need to discuss. We can't say the community in abstract. This is a community.
Yes, it is.
This is one community that also instigates this debate.
Yes.
In this discussion, I'm saying, what are the things we can trigger for each other as a community?
Yeah.
Not waiting to go back to where I live. Within this community,
Yes.
what are the things we can interject? That's my question from the outset.
Yes.
How do we discuss working for the faculty of the imagination, given the information? We have the information. We have the information. Some of us have traveled to these places, Mozambique, Cuba, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm saying now, we need a different paradigm. Not repeat, regurgitate what we've been given by left wing or anybody. We need to be innovative and say, in the discussion, I am interested a change without violence. It's possible. I mean, that debate could be triggering what we're saying. Just the idea of change with human face. Instead of like with fascism, with the like they did it, we'll do it to them. That has not taken us anywhere. That's what I'm saying.
But can I ask you? I didn't realize it was you, Mr. Kareem. So let me say that first of all. But I just think, and I respect your work tremendously, and everybody in the LA Rebellion. But if I can just answer your question, especially now that I know it's you, I think what you did and your peers did in the LA Rebellion is exactly what I'm talking about. The LA Rebellion was a product of this revolution that we had, right? I think you would agree it didn't turn out the way that you wanted, and your filmmakers, your fellow filmmakers wanted. Charles Burnett and the rest of it. I think you and Charles Burnett are two of the greatest filmmakers that we have in this country right now. What about the LA Rebellion could we replicate to grow it bigger and better, to conscientize people, right? That's the only point I'm making in this book, is that we can learn from those lessons and improve upon them if we have the conversation, the dialectic between us. That's all I'm saying.
But even that, my brother, the LA Rebellion is really a creation of UCLA as an institution, who from the outset rejected our protest, our resistance, cultural expressions. Now they are marketing us as a rebellion. For me, a rebellion that doesn't have a sense of continuity is not a rebellion. The baton has to be picked up. Show me the young people now, what we taught in school, etc. Howard, tell me students who are continuing to do it better than us.
They don't
We
exist.
failed. You see, revolutionaries, I say that as a filmmaker, but political friends of mine, from the Black Power movement to the Black Panther, etc., they don't want to go to the area where to say, we failed, and why did we fail? Because when other generations don't pick it up, we failed. That is what I'm preaching now. I'm saying until young people, because our strength was when we were a community collectively. You're talking about, it worked when we were together. But once
It's phenomenal. It was phenomenal.
But once we were divided and scattered,
Right.
we failed.
Yeah.
Unless we tell young people we failed also, but go for the myth is wrong. For me, the myth is a creation of this institution that rejected our existence, and now, etc. So for me, I'm saying now I'm interested. I go to my friends, I go to an argument. There's a conference I refuse to go because it's perpetuation of what's done. I'm interested in why is it that African American filmmaker kids who admired us did not have a sense of working communally to lift it where we left it.
I'm asking the same question. I think that conversation is what I'm talking about, right? I think, I had this conversation with a friend of mine. I think the LA Rebellion, probably along with the Italian realism movement, is probably the greatest film movement in history, even though it was short-lived. All I'm saying is, can we talk about the successes of the LA Rebellion, how we can recreate it, but better, bigger, better, right? That's all I'm saying with this book is those things that work for us. How can we recreate it? Our future is not in our past, but how can we reinvent them in a way that works for the community in a bigger way? The Black Panthers, I think you would have to say, ultimately were a failure, but we can learn so much from what they did, right? But how do we do it better than they did? How do we learn from their failures? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'm sorry to monopolize, but I will say this to you.
It's your story, so.
Yeah, no, but I will say this to you. For me, a generation when conditions are always so-called, the Marxist issue of objective, subjective conditions, there will come generations. What makes me sad is the fact reinventing the will becomes like as if it's a new history making. Like if you take the new Black Panther Party, that's a fashion.
Oh yeah,
show.
no, that's
a
crazy.
fashion show.
Yeah, that's not.
So for me, in the film terms also, I pray, I dread it would be just what that metaphor represents. Young people, if for us even, we've been like the African American political struggle created us.
Yes,
Although
of course.
we were in film school, we're created by the ricocheting, struggle that came out of the Black community.
Right.
We connect that. My wife is also a part of that.
Yeah.
We connect that. But the problem now here is how we can invent it. I can't. I give classes. I teach at Howard. I'm not going to force them to be like me, to do what I did. The idea is, can conditions, when they come, can they pick it up where we left it by where we failed? Not where it's not. See, you say success. I call it failure. You know why, my brother? Because anything, the war against Black people in America, according to my foreigner perspective, is the killing of sense of continuity. White supremacist capacity to kill continuity in Black people has them stranded in circles.
No question.
Sparrow,
Yeah.
but in circles.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I don't like fame. I don't like success because it's not successful if it didn't regenerate. Let's say that all our struggle, it didn't regenerate, then it failed. As far as I'm concerned.
I think the LA Rebellion was an achievement. You would know better than me whether it's successful or not, but I think there's a lot we can learn from it. That's really all I'm saying.
Oh, we have somebody that wants to say something.
Oh, okay. So, hi. So, just a few thoughts. I listening to Hailey and also some of the other speakers, and I was just really thinking about how the power of information, and I wanted to take the time to take off my hat, even though I don't have on a hat, to Wilmer and to John. For Wilmer, for your shows, your many creations of information, spaces for information for the community, because what I'm hearing in terms of trying to create a new man, a new woman to impact our children is that they have to have information. We all have to have information. And right now, whether it's called the corporate media, whether you want to call it however we want to call it, the information systems in this country are broken and very much skewed to keep people in a state of disinformation, to manipulate how people think. And so as much as we can create spaces like this, as much as we can support our own media production, films, books, and congratulations, John, on your book. As much as we can create spaces of information, that's, to me, moving the movement forward, and having that replication that I hear Holly talking about. And also, I think there's the issue of individualism in the United States. So the society fosters a sense of individualism and individual success and achievement, so that I even had to have a conversation with someone in this room recently around the whole issue of hype. Because I covered culture, entertainment, arts for a long time for corporate media, I'm real conscious of that. I know how I can see the PR machine moving. I can hear it in the background. I can see it in the background. I know what's happening. And I have to remind people that hype is not what's important. Because at one point, Diddy, P. Diddy, or whoever he is called himself now, once he was on top of the world. And now that same structure has brought him down to his knees and he's in jail. So it's not about hype. It's not about how successful you are. It's not how famous you are. It's what you're about. It's the information that you're putting out. It's what you stand for. It's your own integrity. It's what you're fighting for. And the final thing I would say is there's a real complex question put out here around how do we do these things? And we can't really solve those kinds of questions in this kinds of forum. But I think that when we all are struggling for whatever it is, whether it's healthcare or against police brutality and murders, whether it's for quality education, whatever it is, we realize many of us come in these various silos. We come to a point where we see that it's an overarching problem of capitalism. And I think that John is dealing with some of that in this book. There may be people in this room who don't agree with that. When I hear people talk about, oh, what do we do, whatever, to me, it's like I'm not saying you have to be an ideologue, but I do think that through study, through practice, through community, which is what John is talking about, we can work on those problems, but we're not going to solve them here in this conversation right now. There was something else with that, but I just want to, express my appreciation for the conversation. Oh, the only other thing related to individuality is that I refuse to let liberals, and especially people in the Democratic Party right now, try to gaslight me as a leftist, try to gaslight Arabs and Muslims in Michigan to tell them that they have to vote for someone they consider a genocidaire, because that's that individualist way of thinking. Oh no, this you can't, they have a right to think outside this binary paradigm.
To protest their killing.
Yeah, they have a right to protest their killing and to not be forced to vote for someone who is murdering their families. Some people have had their families wiped out. So I refuse that. And we have to think, if we talk about opposing the binary, and it's something that Gerald Horne said the other day, is that if you're living in the South, for example, and the Republicans are going to run the table, and it's going to be a red state, how are you going to tell those people that it's not proper to try to build a third party?
Right.
How are you going to tell people in Michigan that they should vote for Kamala when she hasn't even taken the time to talk to them? Right. She hasn't even convinced them. First they said call for a ceasefire. She wouldn't do that. call for an arms embargo. She wouldn't do that. So if she can't do it, why do I have to tell them that they have to vote for her?
Right. And to that point, really
Thank you.
quickly, I think I have this history right. Ronald Reagan, not much positive you can say about Ronald Reagan, but he did call.
Yes.
Yes.
He did call Menachem Begin and said, "Hey man, enough.
Bush is
Stop
slow.
it.
Yeah, that's it.
Bush is
We're
slow.
not doing this anymore."
Yeah.
Joe, and we
So
keep
did Bush.
hearing the Democrats say, "We're working on a ceasefire. We're working on a ceasefire." Oh, but your
They can lie.
shipment, your next
They
shipment
lie anyway. They
of
can lie.
missiles will be delivered next week. But we are working on a ceasefire. Ronald Reagan picked up the phone, called Begin and said, "Enough," and it ended for the moment.
Right.
So to your gaslighting, Esther, you're absolutely right.
And very quickly, if I can just piggyback on that very quickly, I think we're going to take this out. But to your point.
You wanna stop and say
Oh,
something?
right, yeah. So, yeah,
Sell some books.
So until you tell us we gotta go. To that point, Reagan also had a plan to nationalize the banks when the savings and loan industries collapsed because of the same kind of fraud that we saw in the subprime mortgage window. They had a plan to nationalize the banks. Think about Obama, what's that, 25, 30 years later,
Right.
and he has no plan to nationalize. There's no discussion. There's no public option for banking, for healthcare, for anything. So again, I just think that thinking how much we've changed. Where honestly, Richard Nixon couldn't get elected now because he'd be too liberal.
Right.
So anyway,
I think part of the frustration, at least for me, is that if you've been around a certain amount of time, you pretty much know what the problems are. You don't, at least I'm not really, I don't need to go to the nth degree of the details of how much I'm getting killed and which different ways I'm getting killed. I know I'm getting my ass kicked. So the question becomes not how much or how well they're kicking my ass. The question to me is, how do I start kicking their ass so I don't get my ass kicked? 25 years ago, Amos Wilson is one of his last dying acts, published a book, Blueprint for Black Power, 900 pages. And it wasn't a philosophical screed, it was a how-to book, basically, on just that, how to take power. And he goes into 900 pages of different categories of what you need to do, this, that, and the other. Revolutions are not rhetorical exercises, they're social engineering exercises. It's not based on philosophy, it's based on your capacity to get stuff done. And that's why Cuba is able to exist as a semi-free country, which Mexico the president of Mexico just announced that she will help finance Cuba through their power outages and other stuff and got castigated by the United States. So if you can't, like how he said, if you got an idea that you can't materialize, what's the point? And I think for me and a lot of Black people, and not just Black people, but people are saying, that's nice rhetoric, but there's 6 things you have to be able to control in order to be a free people. And that's food, clothing, shelter, your means of communications, transportation, and security. In the United States, various Black communities had 5 of those things. The only thing we've never even thought about controlling is the security. You build your stuff up and white folks bomb you. Okay, so because most of us don't think we're in war, and don't think that they'll come and kill you because they see you as an enemy of war. But we don't see them as an enemy of war, and therefore they just war on us. So I think for me, the question always becomes, that's nice rhetoric. I may not agree, I may agree, but the question is, if you can't feed me, clothe me, house me, then what's the point? At some point, all of this talk has to materialize into some tangible things. And that's what people are waiting for. And that's the allure of people like Trump and these other populists, because they talk about stuff that affects people from the minute they wake up to when they go to bed. So I don't know what class warfare looks like, but I know what being hungry and homeless and not having health care. So what I'm saying is if the talk will become about those things, we don't need to bring up class warfare. We don't need to, because if you can feed me, if I can help, and I can see I can be involved in a movement that will give me abundant, clean, nutritious food, housing, water, et cetera, that's the basis of what needs to be done before you can do a political movement. Because if you can feed a person physically, they'll accept what you feed them psychologically. That's why the white Europeans sent all the missionaries into Africa, because Napoleon said, one missionary is worth 1,000 soldiers. If I can get you to pray to my God and use my money and believe that I'm the Lord Savior of all your existence, even though you didn't need me for 10,000 years, then this very little house I need to do to control you. So, but we never talk about how do we do the opposite. And it's really not that hard, because one thing about capitalism that's very, very good, they know how to psychologically analyze who they want to control. They know your pressure points and your narcissist points and all those places, and they push them and push them and push them, because most people don't really want to be free. They mostly want to be materially comfortable. And people have given up any kind of effort to be free as long as they're materially comfortable enough to say, okay, I know I'm not free, but at least I got air conditioning and HBO and color TV, and I can go to this and da da da. And that's what we're really fighting. And that's what we're really fighting, because when when all of us were overtly oppressed up to World War II, we were all in the same boat. But when many of us start to say, I'm out of here, and go to their cities and go to their gated communities and da da da, and never came back and never reached back. See, that's how they used what you would call classism. Because in DC, there's a famous song by Ledbetter, DC is a bourgeois city. And because I grew up in DC, and I've seen it, you get your good government job and you don't protest nothing. You want to keep that good government job, and you will do nothing to jeopardize that good government job, because with that good government job comes a house with a mortgage and 2 kids in college and all that kind of stuff. So we got to really talk about the specific things that we really wanted to aspire to achieve. And once we start talking specifics, then we'll see a chance to bring the discussion to something that can materialize into something that most of us will want to fight for.
Well, but my answer would be, do we talk about it or do we not? I just think that it's important that we talk about, one of the things I talk about in the book, I write about in the book, but I didn't say, is that a lot of the reason that the ruling class is beating the brakes off of us is because 160 years ago, they managed to speak something called an N-word into existence, right? To reorganize the society around the suffering of the N-word, they had to speak it into existence.
That's not
It did, no, listen to me. It did not exist. So what I'm saying is that storytelling, right? Telling our stories in events like this, as Mr. Jarima does so brilliantly, as this in Sankofa, in the movie Sankofa, and as Mr. Burnett did in his movie. I mean, that is the predicate for revolution. Look at the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution and how it was influenced so much by cinema, right? Which Lenin calls the most revolutionary art form. So I just think that we do need to talk, to strategize, talk about and I say this in the book, if something called the N-word can be spoken into existence, can we speak it out of existence? I think that's very important, because the ideal of the N-word is the predicate for our suffering. So I agree with you. I just think you're using different words than I'm using, right?
No, you're not even dealing with what I'm talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about there.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean,
Exactly.
you just said, first you said we need to stop talking. You said we need to talk about it. So what are you?
specific things.
Bro, that's what the book is about. I wrote about specific things in the book. I don't know how else to answer that question.
Thank you for your book, John.
Okay,
Thank you so
I'm sorry.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. For anyone who doesn't get copies of the book, we do have it available at the bookstore. Before we start our book signing, I wanted to kind of go over some of our events coming up. Tomorrow evening, we will be screening a film about the 1972 conference in Gary, Indiana, regarding alternative Black parties. It's called Nation Time, and the discussion will be called The Election and What Does It Mean to Me? It's going to start at 7 p.m. Professor Clarence will be, yes, he will be here tomorrow as well. On Tuesday, we are going to be broadcasting live from Sankofa with the Washington Informer, starting 7 o'clock about the election. So if any one of you can make it, or if you can't, it will be broadcasted live on our YouTube and our social media as well as the Washington Informer as well. So we have those three events coming up. Wednesday, Thursday, we are probably going to do a What Now edition as part of the series of the election. What now for all of us, like what does it mean, whoever is in office, how do we take it and how do we move forward and what does it mean to us? On Saturday, November 9th, we have a film screening. We have Haile Garima's 1985 documentary film, After Winter, Sterling Brown, will be screened at 7 p.m. All of these events are available on our website and social media. You can RSVP on www.sankofa.com. And on Sunday, November 10th, we will be continuing part of our On Our Mind series. We will be highlighting Congo. It is Congo on our mind. All donations collected will go to WPFW, who has been doing a tremendous job at highlighting all these atrocities around the world and giving us the news the way it should be presented. So we will be screening a film. There will be music and a discussion as well. So far, we've covered Gaza on our mind, Sudan on our mind, Haiti on our mind, and this is our fourth one. And we will continue to do so for any artists, or any poets, singers, anybody that would like to be a part of this, that want to come and stand in solidarity with not just anything in specific, but against what genocide is, what atrocities are. We're very lucky and fortunate to be here in this space, so we want to acknowledge that and kind of open up our hearts and this space for anybody that wants to come and be a part of that as well. We have a lot more events coming up. Please check out our social media and our website. Thank you both for this amazing discussion. I'm just gonna pass the mic to you.
Thank you. Buy a book. We're done.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Say ladies first.
Of course. You want to sign it? Yes. You want me to sign it here? Yeah. It's okay, you think? I was trying not to bore you. What?
And you got better retirement on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, right, yeah, everything. Better with practice.
Yeah, we do.
Well, now,
Trisha, your name's Tommy Stelling, right?
Your best to start there. Connecting the dots
Oh, okay, right.
on YouTube.
Yes. So YouTube and podcast.
Yes. Yeah, that's the intro.
Right.
So I'm gonna have, so go to, and,
When are we gonna get together?
they can talk about.
Oh, good.
Right. Okay, okay, good seeing you.
JAWARA, and that's Aziza,
But,
JAWARA.
Shar means peace loving, and Aziza, Aziza. And Aziza means precious.
I think it's the one.
Is that right?
Get it?
Yeah, bro.
Yes. And providing mainly RT content and recording too, like they have some.
Looks like Sade. That's because you do look like Sade. That's why everybody said it.
Mainly it's RT content and then they run African podcasts.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what was very common. It's like something called the white bees.
Yeah, we had